Now, in all four stories that are part of the theme of freedom and confinement, we see societies in which the individual person, one single person or individual, is sacrificed for the greater good, the good of society. And yet, think about that though. What kind of society is it? Is that really a utopia? Is that really a model society if everybody tries to be happy at the expense of somebody else? And so, what's interesting in the story, The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, right, is that the society has set up this tradition of the lottery, and they do the lottery, and the purpose of it seems to be to have prosperity, to have a good harvest, and if they all go through the lottery, they're going to have a good life. But at each lottery, somebody is sacrificed, somebody must die. And so nobody wants to stand up and say, hey, you guys go ahead and kill me, I'll take a hit for the team, and then I will die. So they all say, well, we'll do it fairly. We'll all just draw names, and whoever draws the name will die. So we're going to look at the interesting reaction, though, that once um, the names are drawn, once you're the one who's chosen, once it's you that has to be the sacrifice, suddenly there's a feeling of it being unfair. And the question is maybe it is unfair. Just because everybody gets together and agrees to have a lottery, is it really fair to beat up on one person for our own benefit? Now, notice Shirley Jackson. I know there's a series on Netflix, The Haunting of Hill House, and this is an award-winning book by Shirley Jackson. It says here in our introduction that she's often cited as one of the best horror novelists of the 20th century, and her novel, The Haunting of Hill House, is considered to be one of the very best. And it had a strong influence on later writers such as Stephen King, considered by many to be one of the greatest horror writers of all time. Okay, so Shirley Jackson's a very interesting story. What I love about it is the story starts off very simple, and just like we saw with A Good Man Is Hard to Find or A Rose for Emily, we're not quite sure what is going on here. But if you read carefully, there are subtle clues that something really is off. Okay, so we see here that it's summertime, it's clear and sunny, and everything's fresh and warm. And it's something strange that it's so warm and sunny, and yet they're all gathering for a very dark purpose. So they all start gathering as it's the end of summer. They're going to be sacrificing this person so that at the end of the summer, as we move into fall, there will be a good harvest and everybody will be prosperous. And notice the constant repetition in the story about trying to hurry up. Everybody wants to get it over with as quickly as possible. And of course, that makes sense, right? They're doing something very disturbing, something dark and sinister going on here. And they just want to get it over with and go back to their lives, right? So it says the children assembled first, of course. It's very interesting. What does it mean, of course? Why would it be obvious that the children, well, see, the children are probably, they have not been to too many lotteries and they're not really thinking about what's going on. Where the adults, the older they get, the more upset they are about they want to stand away from it. They want to get it over with as soon as possible. But the kids are maybe too young to know any better. So the kids show up and they're running around and they're all getting pockets full of stones and they're stacking up rocks or looking for smooth and round stones. And they put a big pile of rocks off into the corner. And if you're reading carefully, you start thinking, wait, why are they all gathering stones? And you start to be curious. Now, when I read this poem the first time, I didn't really think about what the purpose of the stone was. I just kind of filed that detail in the back of my mind and kept reading. And then when later on, if you remember this details, you start to put together what's happening, right? So here we're introduced to the black wooden box and the stool. And this is really symbolic of the rituals and traditions that are passed on from generation to generation to the point that the traditions become kind of dead, that nobody even remembers the point of the traditions anymore. And so notice how the people are kind of standing off. It says they kept their distance. They left the space between themselves and the stool. Nobody wanted to get too close to the stool. They're kind of afraid of it, right? See, even if you look up here, when they got there, the men, they said they stood together away from the pile of stones. So they're standing away from the pile of stones. And then here they are all trying to stand away from the black box and the stool. They're trying to stay away from it, to distance themselves from it, and to get it over with as fast as possible. So mark paragraph 5 here. It's a big, long paragraph about the tradition that over time, this box starts getting worn down and the traditions start to fall apart. And nobody kind of even remembers what was happening. That over time, they forget the point. So there's always this talk about making a new box, but every year they kind of just move on. And the box, it says, gets shabbier each year. And by now it was no longer completely black, but splintered badly along one side to show the original wood color, and in some places faded or stained. So notice this, the box getting faded and stained and splintered and shabby just shows that over time, this tradition is just kind of dying, so to speak. And people are considering just ending it and just stop doing it. But there's people that keep fighting to keep this tradition going. And it says here that so much of the ritual had been forgotten or discarded. They just start using slips of paper instead of chips of wood. And now the population's grown, so the paper is much easier to use anyway. You can't fit a lot of wood inside the box, and so they're just kind of writing names on a piece of paper and putting it in the box, right? So then here we see this disagreement about some people believe one thing, other believe something else. Nobody can kind of agree on what the proper tradition is. They're all forgetting it. Well, now the main character of the story, Annie Hutchinson, shows up, and look, she comes hurrying along, and she's like, "Oh, it's like she's coming to a little league baseball game or something, or a 4th of July picnic." And she's all joking around. Hey, sorry, I forgot I forgot what date it was. I just completely lost track of time, and I just ran down here. I almost forgot. And so everybody's talking good and humoredly and cheerfully, and they let Tess, I'm saying Ann, I said Ann Hutchinson. I meant to say Tessie Hutchinson. Now, the reason why I said Ann Hutchinson is because I think of the name Hutchinson makes me think of Ann Hutchinson, a figure from early American history who was teaching the Bible and teaching women. And she was eventually charged by her community for violating certain protocols and rules. And she was exiled from the community for teaching women how to read and think about the Bible and stuff. And the view is that women should not be doing that, that they did not have the authority. So to me, Tessie Hutchinson, that name makes me think of early American history in the colonies with the Puritans and the exiling of Anne Hutchinson. And so a lot of these names have kind of a colonial or American kind of history reference. So pay attention to the family names. So, for example, Mr. Graves and Mr. Summers. It seems a coincidence that the names would be Summer, which is something bright and sunny, and Grave is something very dark and deadly. And so Tessie Hutchinson comes up to meet with her husband. But after a little laughter, then they all kind of get started, and it's time to do the lottery. And then notice people kind of get hushed, and they all want to get through it very fast. And notice they follow the rule, which is that they have a rule that each man will. So you can see that there's a sort of gender, there's sort of a sexism here, where the man has to pick for the women. Each man picks for the family. And notice that everybody is nervous, and they read the names, and they go through Adams, Makes you think of maybe Adam and Eve, the fall of human beings in the Garden of Eden. Clark, Delacroix, Dunbar, Graves, Summers, Hutchinson. Now, look, there's a big discussion here. He says, I've heard rumors that some people are thinking about getting rid of the lottery. And old man Warner, who represents the old society, he wants to fight to keep this tradition. And he goes, pack of crazy fools, listening to the young folks, nothing's good enough for them. Next thing you know, they'll be wanting to go back to living in caves. Nobody work anymore. Live that way for a while. Used to be a saying about lottery in June, corn be heavy soon. See, that's where I got the idea of it, harvest and prosperity. Lottery in June, corn be heavy soon. He says, first thing you know, we'd be all eating stewed chickweed and acorn. There's always been a lottery, he added. Bad enough to see young Joe Summers up there joking with everybody. Some places have already quit lotteries, Mrs. Adams said. Nothing but trouble in that, old man Warner said. Pack of young fools. So there's a good a voice from old man Warner. He's all upset that nobody respects the old ways. Nobody cares about the traditions. They're all a bunch of crazy fools. And he says we don't want to go backwards and to the old days. Right. And he's been here, he says, 77 years he's gone through this lottery. So he's pretty lucky that he never gets chosen out of 77 years, right? Well, we find out that the Hutchinsons, Bill Hutchinson, chooses for the family. And like I said, notice automatically, suddenly, Tessie Hutchinson shouted, you didn't give him enough time. It wasn't fair. Now, do you think Tessie Hutchinson would be complaining and calling this lottery unfair if somebody else were the one, if a different family had drawn the spot? No, Tessie Hutchinson does not claim that it's unfair until her family is the one picked. And so we're all fine with sacrificing somebody as long as we're not the one sacrificed. I remember watching a show, Survivor, where they all try to gang up and say, hey, who are we going to vote off the island? And they go, I don't care who it is as long as it's not me. And we're going to see that in Rocket Night also. I don't care who it is as long as it's not me. And so Tessie Hutchinson immediately starts to feel a victim of something unfair because they're the ones chosen. You rushed us, you didn't get us a chance, and they go, look, everybody picked the name out exactly the same. And the husband's like, come on, Tessie, calm down. It was fair. So she keeps yelling, it's not fair. It wasn't fair. So Bill Hutchinson says, I've got 3 kids, Bill Jr., Nancy, and little Dave. Then there's Tessie and me. And here's Hutchinson still, Mrs. Hutchinson. I think we ought to start over. I tell you, it wasn't fair. You didn't give them enough time to choose. Everybody saw that. Listen. And she's trying to plead her case. And of course, nobody wants to go. You think that people want to go back and redraw? They're happy that somebody else got chosen. There's no way. And maybe think about the poem, first they came for the Jews, right? As long as I'm not the one that's being abused, then I don't care. But I should care on behalf of other groups, because if they're attacking other groups, in a sense, I have to think that they're attacking me as well, right? Old man Warner's still upset that things are not the way that they used to be. In this, he kind of reminds me of the grandmother in A Good Man is Hard to Find. She's always talking about the good old days and how great things used to be. And yet she's reminiscing on a time where there was a lot of racism and violence and sexism and all kinds of problems. The past is not always better than the present. Things were not perfect in the past. In a lot of ways, things are much better now than they used to be. And so old man Warner wants to go back to the old way of doing it, but his old way is not necessarily good. Obviously, sacrificing and killing a family member is not a good thing. So notice again the language here. Come on, let's hurry up. They keep saying, let's hurry, let's hurry, let's hurry, let's hurry. So they go and they draw now. And now that every name of the Hutchinson family goes in, and who gets drawn? It's Tessie Hutchinson is the one who's picked. And so she's going to be the victim. She won the lottery, which is, this is not a lottery you want to win. All right. You don't get money in this lottery, you get stoned to death. So now we start to figure out what all the rocks were for. And here's a very creepy line. It says, even though the villagers had forgotten the ritual and lost the original black box, they still remembered to use the stones. The pile of stones the boys had made earlier was ready. And so a light bulb goes off if you're reading and you remember them gathering up those stones, and you realize that they were getting ready to throw the rocks at somebody and kill them. And that's a kind of an indictment on human nature, that they may forget a lot of details about the ritual, but the one thing they never forget is how to pick up a stone and kill somebody. So Mrs. Delacroix selected a stone so large he had to pick it up with both hands. Come on, she said, hurry up, right? The children had stones already. And here's the, the darkest part of the story. Somebody gave little Davy Hutchison a few pebbles. Here's some pebbles, throw these at your mommy and kill her. And so that was pretty dark, that somebody handed little Davy little rocks to throw at his mom. Now there, of course, there's Tessie Hutchison as the victim. And she knows what's going to happen to her. And she's screaming, it isn't fair. And then a stone hits her on the side of the head. And they all go after her. And there she is in her last words. It isn't fair. It isn't right. Mrs. Hutchinson screamed, and then they were upon her. Okay. So think about those words as she screams out, it isn't fair. It isn't right. And I think she's correct. It isn't fair. It isn't right. And that's a great thing about the way that our country was founded and written, is that you cannot take away individual rights. People cannot gang up on somebody and kill them. There's somebody who stands up to the mob and says, you shall not kill this person today. Who stands up for the rights of the individual person? If you have a society that does not value the life of the individual, you think we're going to sacrifice individuals for the good of the whole group. But a group is nothing but a group of individuals. And so it seems strange that a society would try to succeed by sacrificing someone else. Now, an author that was influenced a lot by Shirley Jackson's Lottery is Alexander Weinstein. And I really love this story, Rocket Night. I had never read it until I got this textbook a couple years ago and read it. And it's one of my favorite stories. And it's kind of a modern, a more up-to-date take on the lottery. We have the same situation, but by putting it in an elementary school, right? It's really a kind of a dark and disturbing story, that the whole point of this story is to get together and pick one kid and to send them off into outer space on a rocket. And notice it starts, it was rocket night in our daughter's elementary school. And they all get together like some kind of carnival or school event, but they're there to do something pretty terrible, right? And so he says, last year we placed Laura Jackson into a capsule. And notice they pick kind of kids that are kind of awkward and weird. They've got maybe goofy hairstyle or old clothes. They don't have a stylish clothes. They may smell, pick their nose, eat their boogers. Kids don't want to play with them on the playground. They're chosen last for sports, for dodgeball. And so it's just the kind of awkward kids who don't really fit in. And you think that it's kind of sad. Maybe by the time they get to high school or college, they finally hit their stride, find their identity, and they move on to a relatively decent life. But they just really have a hard time in school. And I remember that kids like that in my elementary school when I was little. And I saw kids like that in my kids, in my own kids' schools, that certain kids that were always kind of awkward and teased and did not have a lot of friends, and sort of a sad thing, right? So Laura Jackson was that kind of kid, right? Short, little fat, known for limp dresses, which hung crookedly on her body. She's not very attractive. She doesn't have stylish clothes. She's not popular. This is before that, we sent a boy from India whose name none of us could remember. See, the idea of this, it comes out later in the story that people can't even remember the names of these kids. So here we are at the Rose Hill community, And they said they all look forward to this night falling in late October. So there's also this kind of feeling of October as the end of summer, as fall comes on. There's this um, atmosphere that's very similar to the lottery as they go to launch these kids, right? Now, they said October is a good time because school year starts and there has to be enough time for kids to kind of figure out who the loser is. So he says by October, we have a pretty good sense of who the best children are to send off into outer space. And notice what I said about Survivor. Hey, they form alliances and they gang up on somebody and they say, hey, as long as I'm not the one being voted off the island, I'm okay. I'll go along with whatever the group says, as long as it's not me. And notice that the children do that. They gather up and they form these clusters. They form little cliques and groups of friends. And they go, hey, look, hey, how about the four of us? We all vote for this other kid. And they all say, sure. And they all form these alliances and they're plotting and planning to think who they're going to send off. And notice the poor other kids are off alone by themselves, just making themselves targets. And look at this, because it's funny, but it's terrible. He says these kids, these other kids, he says the ones with stars and galaxies in their futures. It's a terrible line. It's just saying that these are the kids. They're at the edges of the field, playing with sticks alone or staring into mud puddles at drowned worms. So here's a kid off by themselves, looking at worms and mud puddles, playing with sticks, while the rest of the kids are gathering together in clusters on the playground, choosing who to launch out into outer space. Right? See, our kids run the perimeter playing tag, but notice it says collecting in clusters. The girls in clusters. So sort of the social kids, the popular kids form these cliques, these clusters, and they gang up on these poor innocent kids who are off by themselves playing around with drowned worms in the mud, right? So this year, the kid that's going to be sent off is poor Daniel. And he's holding his mom's skirt. Like his clothes are wrinkly. It doesn't look like he's had a shower. And it says one could immediately see the reason that he'd been chosen by our children. Hand-me-down quality to the clothing, mildewed stench of thrift stores. The collar sat askew, revealing the white undershirt. Brown slacks were held tightly by an oversized belt. The end of the belt flopped lazily from side to side. He brought stubby pencils to school, chewed up ends that got stuck in sharpeners. He had the habit of picking his nose. He had creepy, the kid with a weird lunch everybody makes fun of. He would just have stale crackers and a warm box of chocolate milk for lunch. There was a smear of cupcake frosting on the corner of his mouth. And seeing this detail, we knew that our children had chosen well. That's so dark. He was the sort of child who makes one proud of one's own children. And you feel sorry for these parents. You feel sympathy for them when these parents have children who are kind of loners, who don't really make friends easily, who have an awkward time at school. It weighs on the hearts of the parents. They want their children to feel connected and to have friends, and it's a difficult thing, right? But notice the parents don't really like Daniel's parents either. In fact, they said one of the great things about Daniel being launched into outer space is that they're not going to have to deal with the parents anymore. And notice here, even the principal doesn't even remember the name of the kid. He calls Daniel Donald, and he says he hopes the journey will be a joyful one. And they all clap and everything. The parents come over that, and then here's the description of the parents, and it says, "We realized with relief that when we get rid of Daniel, then we're going to get rid of these parents too." So now the rocket's getting ready to go. The kid's getting kind of nervous. He doesn't want to go off to outer space alone, obviously. He's clinging to his parents. And then it says, I watched my daughter pry the boy's fingers from his mother's legs as two larger fifth graders seized his waist and dragged him away. So his own daughter comes over and pries the kid's fingers off. And it's almost like the dad here, the parent, whoever's writing this, is proud of the his own daughter for being so cruel. Now we wonder what's going to happen. So there's a bunch of food and water up there for plenty of time. And he says that budget cuts mean that, who knows how long the kids are going to last up there. They may have just a little bit of food and water. What are they going to do? Just die of hunger? Nobody even cares what happens. The kids are going to go up there and just die. And the only thing they have for company is a microphone, and they can just speak into the microphone. But really, there's nobody listening. There's nobody talking back. They just have a microphone to talk into, right? And now we get to what I think is like the most cruel part of the story, where the kid makes one small favor, right? He's going to be up there all alone in this rocket, and he just wants to know if he can have one of his favorite items, which is a little brown bear, a little pencil with a brown bear eraser on the end of it. And the principal says, well, you don't need one of those. Plus, it's probably too late anyway, because we've already cleared out your desk and we don't have your stuff anymore. So they won't even give him that one little brown bear eraser. So there they are, they blast him off, and everybody sighs with awe and applauds. And then he says the boy faded from her thoughts. They're going to just completely forget about him. But there's a very interesting ending to this story, okay, where he says, I myself had all but forgotten about the child. And yet, when I took out the garbage that night, so taking out the trash is kind of weird. It's like them launching that kid into outer space. It's like they're taking out the trash, treating this kid like garbage. But he goes, but as I took out the recycling that night, I paused and I thought of the children up there. And I don't know how to read that. I don't know how you read that ending. Is this person feeling some type of concern? Does he care about the kids? Does one small little voice for just a moment, does he look up there and think about those kids and wonder what's going on? Um, uh, what do we make of this? Or is it the fact that he doesn't really, just for a moment, he thinks about it, but it doesn't really affect him very much? All right. And so again, it seems kind of there. Maybe there's a little bit of his conscience feels just a slightly bit guilty about what they're doing to these young kids just to make their lives easier. All right. All right. So those are our first two stories, the lottery and a story that was kind of loosely based on or inspired by the lottery called Rocket Night. And now we're going to look at two other stories. First, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, and then we're going to look at Harrison Bergeron.